Let me introduce the speakers to you today. We have two speakers today, Professor Shigeru Iwakabe and Simran Chatha. Shigeru Iwakabe is a professor of psychology at Risumekan University in Osaka, Japan. He conducts psychotherapy research on clients' emotional change from an integrative perspective. His research interests include training and professional development in psychotherapy, case study research methods, psychotherapy integration, and cultural and social issues related to the practice of psychotherapy. He's the past president of Society for Psychotherapy Research, SPR, and also the Society for the Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration, SEPI or SEPI. He is a certified trainer in emotion-focused therapy, and he maintains a group practice in Tokyo. So the second speaker today is Simran Chatha, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist and certified emotion-focused therapist. She's currently an EFT supervisor in training and head of the Emotion-Focused Therapy Institute, India. As an early career researcher, she is currently pursuing her PhD at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. Her research interests include psychotherapy processes in EFT and other person-centered experiential therapies, empathic attunement, therapist responsiveness, supervision processes, conversation analysis, and comprehensive process analysis. Let me go over a little bit about the plan today. So Shigeru is going to present for about 20 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session for about 10 minutes or so. And then Simran will present her part for 20 minutes, and then we have another Q&A, and then we will open the floor for discussion. All right. So without further ado, let me invite Professor Shigeru Iwakabe to present.
Thank you so much for Harold for a wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for gathering Saturday morning or afternoon or maybe Friday evening too. I'm very excited about today's topic because my research is on emotion, and I've been practicing on emotion-focused therapy. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. So I will be talking about working with Japanese clients in emotion-focused therapy and working with emotions with Japanese clients. And I will be talking a little bit about our research on outcome and process of emotion-focused therapy with Japanese clients, and the results of interview study, because can get we can really get to how they experienced expressing emotions, working on the difficult emotions. Okay. So I'm going to first talk about emotion focused therapy and then talk about Japanese culture and how emotion is actually conceptualized or dealt with, and then move into the study. Okay. So on the right, you see the book cover of the newest emotion focused therapy textbook, which is a wonderful. And if you're interested in learning emotion focused therapy, I definitely recommend you start from this book. Now, what is emotion focused therapy? I think there are several important sort of principles of emotion focused therapy. Emotion focused therapy is integrative, humanistic psychotherapy for individuals, couples, now for family, groups, and all types of all modes of psychotherapy. But what is very common what is common amongst all kinds of emotional focused therapy is that emotion is a key driver of change. Allowing, experiencing, expressing primary adaptive emotions. These are healthy, healing, emotions from sadness, anger, even negative emotions. Arriving them, expressing them is a very important part of therapy. At the same time, changing primary maladaptive emotion, that's at the core of psychopathology and emotion dysregulation. We have to also address these. Another important thing is that EFT differentiate between primary emotion and the secondary emotions. Secondary emotions are reaction to more primary emotions and other psychological processes. So they are actually kind of defensive reactions and also symptomatic emotions. Another important type of emotion, especially for Japanese people, is instrumental emotions, which is a social emotional behavior, kind of a lubricant to get along with people or give good impressions. And with working with Japanese clients, we really have to watch out for instrumental emotions and get to primary maladaptive emotions. Another important aspect of emotion focused therapy is a therapeutic relationship. It values empathic attunement, genuineness, therapeutic presence, non-hierarchical, egalitarian relationship, I-thou relationship, really the very human one-on-one type relationship. And finally, it uses emotional processing tasks like a chair work. Evoking strong emotion is a very important part of the process. And the therapists need to balance between following and leading, which means that sometimes therapists use more empathic stance. Other times, therapists direct the client using chair work and other emotional processing tasks. So let's move on to the Japanese, some of the Japanese cultural, emotional characteristics. I mean, first of all, as you know, there are a lot of different display rules or cultural rules of emotional expression. In Japan, expressing negative emotion in social situation is considered not well-mannered or polite. Strong emotion is avoided. Subtlety is preferred. Modesty, moderation is considered very important and they are valued. And it's interesting, even positive emotions are often suppressed. I wonder if you know Tsai's study on ideal affects. She found that Asians, ideal affects are the affects that you want to experience, you prefer. Asians tend to prefer lower arousal positive emotions, not too much excitement, but calmness, peacefulness, while European Americans tend to prefer more higher arousal positive emotions, excitement, joy. And I think that you can see in some of those pictures, even the smiles are a little bit, uh, subdued. And asserting one's opinions and expressing oneself is not highly valued. It's considered show off or too pushy, too opinionated, and silence is even more preferred. Nonverbal expressions, often very soft, gentle, and controlled. And gestures, you may not even see the hand gestures, right? But you could see the face turning red, and that part is still there. Another important thing I wanted to tell you is this book by Takeo Doi. It's from 1950s. It's called Anatomy of Dependence. In this book, he talked about one of the interpersonal or personality features, cultural features of Japanese, which is honne and tatemae. Honne being true inner feelings that you never express in front of others. And tatemae is facade, very important. It's not superficial. It is something you need to have in Japan. So in a social situation, usually there are more rules of engagement. Relationships are very hierarchical, and deference, reservation are very valued rather than being just intimate and close. Another important characteristic that I study a lot is shame and embarrassment. On the left, you see the ad for the Tokyo Metro, which says, please do it at home. And there's a woman fixing makeup. And there's this very judgmental middle-aged man, kind of a Japanese social value, standing and staring at her, but not saying anything. But Japanese people are hypersensitive to social evaluation. Humility is highly valued, but humility is often instrumental in the sense that it is something we have to do. And shyness, coyness, often considered an attractive trait. I mean, these have a lot of implications for practicing EFT in Japan. First of all, strong evoking strong emotional expression is not easy because it evokes shame as well. And direct expression of emotion might be too explicit, too much. Now, therapeutic relationship, it's, as we work with Japanese clients, but also teaching Japanese therapists, anger is very difficult emotion to deal with because it's considered immature and inappropriate. So there are a lot of social rules which prevent the therapist and client to have more genuine I-thou type of relationship. And a lot of instrumental emotions, smiling and being proper and appropriate. So let me move into the study that we have conducted. We conducted a study, it's still ongoing, process and outcome of EFT for emotional injuries. That means like being betrayed, failing on exams or some kind of emotional injuries. And we had 16 sessions, and the therapist had some professional training in emotion focused therapy. So far, we have 35 clients, and we found that a large effect size, Cohen's D effect size over 1 point for depression, emotion regulation, interpersonal problems, self-compassion, etc. All aspects of psychological functioning, including well-being, improved. So emotion-focused therapy works, no problem. I mean, it's actually very effective with Japanese client. But we also found some of the important challenges the clients experience in spite of the fact that treatment itself was quite effective. So here I'm going to present not all the results, but some of the results from the study. The interviews, we conducted interviews with all clients, but at this point, we analyzed 17 clients. And the interviews are conducted right after the treatment was completed. And we used grounded theory analysis. Now, I'm going to give just a little bit of overview and some of the results that relate to some cultural aspect of Japanese people. Now, so these are the overview of helpful experiences of therapy. There are mainly 5 categories or so-called clusters: experiencing a warm, close relationship with a professional therapist, which is very common in all type of therapy, caring for the emotional change, expanding changes in daily life, facing difficulties during the session, which we will look closely. And now, okay. Now, one of the main cluster was called experiencing a warm and close relationship with a professional therapist. And this category consists of five lower level categories. And as you can see, 1.1, appreciating therapist professional stance and skills. So even though warmness, closeness, validation, safety, empathy were very important, Japanese clients also valued therapists being professional and guiding the therapy. Other categories, as you can see, which I found particularly interesting, is the therapist's presence at the critical moments, which is that when the client was experiencing intense pain, emotional pain, the therapist made sure that they are present and supporting clients in that moment, which is the sort of like combining empathic therapist with more directive, strong authority role therapist. Now, the second largest cluster for helpful experiences is called carrying forward emotional change. As you can see, this you see what's considered healing and therapeutic in emotion-focused therapy, describing emotional difficulties in words and sorting them out, which is often called emotional awareness, becoming aware of problems underneath the surface, expressing and experiencing emotion in new ways, not old ways that they know, new ways, and experiencing positive emotional states, etc. So these are very much similar to the findings from European and North American clients. So let me just give you, I hope I have a little bit more time, right? Until 25. Okay, just the second one, expressing and experiencing emotions in new ways. I'm in my 40s. I have a daughter, so I haven't cried in front of others for many years. When talking with the therapist, my emotion overflowed and I was on the verge of crying. I was able to do so without hesitation. It's almost like, overcoming hesitation, sort of the restraint was very helpful for her. Now, this is what I actually really wanted to focus on today. Even though the clients improved dramatically at the end of the treatment, they also experienced a lot of difficulties during the treatment. One is the therapeutic relationship challenges. There was a feeling, a psychological distance or gap with the therapist lack of response, and taking voluntary action to improve the therapeutic relationship. The next one called emotional difficulties during the session, having negative feelings about chair work, not being able to engage with emotions, feeling stuck, etc. Let me just read some of the clients' narratives. This is about the relationship challenge. When it came to the therapist's response, I can't deny that it was slightly less than what I wanted. I wondered if she really understood me or if she really listened to me. I felt anxious, like, did I even answer the therapist's question properly and give her what she was looking for? I felt unsure about whether the therapy was going in the right direction half the time. The therapist response was not enough for this client. I think the therapist was not expressive enough or responsive enough. Another one, about the emotional difficulty during the session. I don't know what the therapist meant by sensation in the body. So when the therapist said, let's try to focus on sensations in your body, I was silent. I was like, what is this time for? So this is very, new to the client, and this focusing on the quality was just a foreign language for the client. Let me speak about just one short vignette about shame in uh, one of the client reported. So this client, a female client, was finally able to disclose about the bullying that she experienced 20 years ago. The therapist was empathic and validated her pain. She felt a sense of relief in the session. Which which was undoubtful. It was clear from her expression. But next week, she came back reporting that she had a hard week and she was afraid of the following session. She disclosed that she was overwhelmed with intense shame after the session for revealing herself too much. She regretted that she ever mentioned about being a victim of bullying, and she was most embarrassed about showing her anger, which was childish and inappropriate. Therapist validated her shame and affirmed that she did something new and significant, and it might feel strange and bewildering. But this is not a single incident, but often reported by Japanese clients. Even though they felt good, they have that shame that pushed them back to where they are. A brief discussion or summary. First of all, Japanese clients, there are a lot of individual differences. Some people love to do chair work and they want to express because they are usually holding back their emotions, but they do still experience some difficulties in getting to the primary emotions. When the strong emotion is evoked, they often feel shame or discomfort. So optimal level of arousal is more important than just intense emotions. I think shame often comes in during emotion work, and that's what we need to look for. The Japanese clients often see therapists as an authority figure, and that they shouldn't bother therapists with our feelings because they're too important for our minor, distress. So they make assumptions, these assumptions which make emotional disclosure difficult and experiential tasks very intimidating because they have to follow the therapist. So the Japanese in working with Japanese clients, we really need to be attuned to nonverbal cues, so-called alliance rupture, withdrawal markers, and a lot of politeness behaviors often mask their complaints and negative emotions. They smile. And we need to normalize and validate their emotional restraints and defenses, which is a better strategy than confronting them. Experiential work needs to be introduced in a gentle and a gradual manners. And discussing shame is very, very important and productive because many Japanese clients do suffer from a lot of shame-related problems. I think that in the future, it'd be great to study more of those challenging moments in therapy where working with the emotions difficult, and also a process of introducing chair work. What are the ways we can present chair work in a more, I mean, in a way that's more attractive to clients and less intimidating, less anxiety provoking. And another thing that, I think I would love to work on is the process of working with anger, because anger is so, so avoided. Thank you. And I think at the end, we'll talk about SPR meeting next year. I'd love to see you in Osaka next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shigeru, for the presentation. So I'll open the floor to the audience to see if you have any questions. Feel free to raise your hand and, open the mic, or you can type on the chat, in the chat. While we're waiting, maybe I have one question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So direct discussion of shame, it sounds really intimidating to me. Like that may make the person feel even more shameful in a way, or how does it work, and what are some, advice?
Yeah, I think that would be a very interesting point. Yeah, you're right. But I think that the fact that shame is a very common everyday feeling that many Japanese people feel, and I feel, and it's natural, but it often makes things difficult. Sort of adding humor to it
Hmm.
and the therapist disclosing in non-shameful, compassionate, but in a humorous way, sort of detox the toxicity of shame. And we talking about the shameful things with the people you are close to is actually not shameful, but kind of fun and liberating.
Hmm.
So I think it has to be done gently, but inviting clients with a lot of encouragement and therapist disclosures, I think it is very helpful to do in early moments in therapy.
Hmm. So we have a question
Mhm.
in the chat box. Does
Yeah.
the expression of shame differ from, between women and men in Japan?
Yeah. I think that's a very important question, and I think so too. I think that the Japanese men tend to react with a secondary feeling of secondary anger when they
Mm,
feel shame or embarrassment. They get angry for making them feel shame. I
mm,
think that women tend to experience shame and they tend to have more secondary sadness, like they feel sad.
mhm,
But I think that's an interesting point, and I'd love to look at studies.
mhm. So another question, is it good to give a list of emotions or feelings for Asian clients who are difficult to describe their own emotions during sessions? Then they
Yeah,
try to disclose their feelings, which are so complicated to them.
yeah. I think this is interesting. I think maybe teenagers and adolescents that might be very helpful, but not to make it mechanical and intellectual. I would prefer to do more experiential psychoeducation. When that emotion is actually happening, you want to add some, explanation about what the feeling is or what the feeling might be, so that they can relate their head and their body. But that's a really interesting type of question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the maturity level and if we wanted to, scaffold a little bit and give them some choices versus leaving it really open-ended.
Exactly.
Hmm. So can you share how optimal arousal may look like in therapy?
I think that, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it differs from one client to another. You can ask them, but I think in EFT, it's considered contact-free aware. They feel the emotion in their body, but they can also reflect on it and they can talk rather than the emotions overwhelming the cognitive processes, but being able to feel it and think about it at the same time and be
So,
in contact with the therapist.
mhm. So, so what I'm thinking is, we need to have a sign that they can still talk while emotionally aroused. If they can't even talk, then it is too much, right?
Right.
Hmm. How about the daily life of the clients? They seem to learn a lot about their emotions in therapy. Then going back to society that's afraid of these emotions might still be challenging.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the therapy creates a space where all emotions are welcomed, but not in daily life, right? So how
Mhm.
they or how do we help them fill the gap? That's a very interesting question. Yeah. Maybe we need another session like this to talk about that, bridging the life and the therapy world.
Mhm. Or if there are ways to make it into more action, like what would it be like to disclose some of these feelings to close ones around you or
Yeah.
trusted people or
Just briefly, we have a study where we ask clients to take the diary. You
Mm,
know, they write about what they experienced in the session, and they also have to write about what they experienced after the session and how what they experienced in the therapy relate to their daily life. Sometimes what they learn about the therapy brings new behaviors and new connections or better interpersonal relationship, but sometimes it backfires.
mm. I can almost imagine the disappointment maybe even greater because they have been able to really process and talk about emotions in therapy, but the rest of the hours besides that therapeutic hour, I can't do it.
Right, right. And other people are annoyed, like, why are you so emotional? Or like, why are you acting differently? You used to be much more obedient. Now you're more expressive or,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah. So are people in Japan generally open to receive therapy, or is there stigma behind it still?
yeah, I think there are high stigma, but the people are changing and they are more open and seeking therapy more.
Hmm. So are there ways to, just out of curiosity, are there ways to, promote or encourage people to go to therapy?
I think the psychologists try, but I think, because of the media, when someone famous or some government, actions often bring, um, you know, uh, mental, psychological issues into their awareness. So, I mean,
Mm.
psychologists are working hard, but the influence of media is very important
Right.
in promoting psychotherapy and fighting against stigmas.
Yeah, so maybe the last question before we move on to Simran's presentation. I come across some clients who are Chinese women living in Malaysia. Their self-esteem are really low and shy to express themselves. So is it crucial to boost up their self-esteem during sessions?
That's a very interesting question, but I think that the many Japanese clients or Asian clients, they have more of external self-esteem that's very low, but their more secret self-view is extremely, more, narcissistic but fragile self.
Mhm.
There are the imbalance between facade and inside. So it's not just the outside low self-esteem presentation that you need to deal with, but
Mm,
more fragile, but could be grandiose self ideal that might be also that need attention too. I think that's also interesting question about self-presentations.
mhm. That's really interesting in terms of what is presented versus what they really feel inside.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. I feel, I'm so bad, I'm so stupid, I cannot do anything, but inside, they still have this dream view of self as more, I don't know, competent, capable.
Hmm. or also having a lot of judgments of others that I'm better than you. But this is all
Exactly.
internal.
Exactly. Exactly.
Can I also ask a question here?
Sure,
Uh,
of course.
yeah, uh, when I was going through, I mean, in the presentation, I was thinking about when you talked about how emotions are experienced and expressed. And I realized that in India, that different regions and we have different cultures. So different regions express and have a relationship with emotions differently. So
Mhm.
is that also true for Japan?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting in terms of, I mean, maybe there are similarities, but also like generally, I guess like there's so many nuances to just your relationship with emotions in terms of like how it's expressed
Yes. Yes.
The
and what's allowed.
regional and even individual differences.
Exactly. Regional is huge for a small country.
hmm Yeah, like urban versus suburban and
Exactly.
very different experiences.
Generations.
hmm
Mhm.
All right, thank you. So we now turn over the floor to Simran.
Thank you. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, so I'm going to turn towards talking about some therapist processes that I have researched or I'm currently studying. Um, and it's an absolute honor to be here with you both, especially because I don't have that much experience in research. It's just been 2 years of doing psychotherapy research. And my presentation actually probably has parts of like everything that I have studied in these 2 years. So, I'll be presenting parts of the research that we've done. Um, and we're going to focus on very specific therapist processes that I've researched. So it is not related to, or at least when we did the study, it had nothing to do with researching it in the Indian context or the Asian context. So my reflections about that in this topic today in the presentation are my own. Um, but I think it's given me a different way of looking at, especially the first study that we did. So, okay, so let me start. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the therapeutic stance in EFT, then situating it a little bit in the Indian context, going into the empathic conjecture study that that I did with two of my colleagues, and then talk a little bit about my PhD project on on empathy blocks, if we have the time. So the therapeutic stance in EFT is person-centered and what we call process guiding, which is kind of the balance between following and guiding, as we say in terms of islands of work in an ocean of empathy, where we blend both being and doing. So being kind of refers to therapeutic presence and empathic attunement. It's the therapist's way of being fully present and relating with the client. And doing kind of involves the, very process-oriented, marker-guided interventions. And I specifically thought of talking about this because of, this. I knew that Shigeru is going to talk a little bit about the power hierarchy in the room. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of go into what that means even in the therapeutic stance. And so from what I understand, in EFT, when we talk about authority, we talk about two different kinds of authority, epistemic and deontic authority. And we always look at clients as the expert on their experience. And we give them the epistemic authority, which is basically about them knowing best about their own experience. And we look at ourselves as process experts, or maybe we hold it very tentatively, our process expertise, and that helps us or gives us the space to propose certain things in the therapy room. Sorry, I'm a bit unwell, so I might have to take pauses in between speaking. So EFT therapists hold their process expertise very, very tentatively and offer proposals. And sometimes it could be experiential work, chair work, that sort of thing. And I have to say that I also had almost like sort of my own insights about this, because this is very interesting for me, coming from the experience or the training background that I come from. So and I really want to talk about this, but most therapist training programs in India focus on directive approaches. So the therapists are taught and encouraged to take epistemic authority or an expert role, pretty similar to what Shigeru was talking about, clients expecting the therapist to be experts as well. This is also tied to the biomedical model, or looking at therapists as problem solvers. I think that increases the responsibility or the pressure of being useful, kind of offering something concrete, doing interventions, that sort of thing. And that's very, very much ingrained in our background. Additionally, there are a lot of systemic constraints. So we have very limited resources, very few mental health professionals. And that's why there's, I think, more of a focus on brief symptom-focused treatment approaches in general. And now, kind of keeping this in mind and the therapeutic stance in EFT, I've also noticed that many therapists hesitate, to take this deontic authority, because the trainings give very limited attention to therapy processes and moment-to-moment micro skills. So I don't think we feel, coming out of training, we don't feel equipped to think of therapy in terms of process, and to really look at different kinds of processes in general. And of course, if you're just starting out, and it certainly was my experience that there's almost like an attraction to prioritize certainty, to prioritize something concrete by using more techniques and interventions. An additional piece of this is that because it's changing, but there is a very strong focus on the biomedical model in the training. There's a clinical culture, I think, in psychotherapy in general that values neutrality and objectivity. So I think that can lead to therapists almost like mistrusting themselves in terms of their own empathic resonance, or muting it out, or trying to think from their head and come up with maybe insights that seem clever, or that feel like they're doing enough for the client, or giving them something, clever or important. So kind of keeping this in mind, I think it's really interesting that my first research project was on empathic conjectures. And while it wasn't my decision to do this study, the study was started by Robert and Hamid, and I kind of joined into the study. I find it really interesting because I always had this implicit need to convey to therapists that in terms of empathic responses, maybe empathic conjectures or more exploratory responses in EFT are probably very misunderstood in our culture. And they're not coming out of nowhere, or they're just baseless guesses in a sense. And I quickly kind of give you one of the definitions before our study. So empathic conjectures are tentative guesses at clients' implicit experiences from a shared frame of reference. So speaking the unspoken often involves the therapist making guesses based on their empathic resonance. So it's almost like this is not possible when you don't use your resonance, right? In there, I've put down some examples to have a better understanding of what an empathic conjecture might look like. And this is from our study. So here the therapist says, yeah, you look very sad right now, Carl. Is that sadness on your face? So as you can see, the therapist actually kind of observes the nonverbal expression of sadness and kind of, uses that in the empathic conjecture very, very tentatively. So it is very much a guess. It's tentative, right? I'm going to give you one more example before I talk about the study. And here I've included what the client said. If I didn't care about him, let him get skin cancer. Screw it. I don't give a damn. Let him die. And the therapist says, right, it's like I'm pointing those things out to him because he matters to me, because I want us to be together, I want us to work out. So again, you can see it's tentative, but it's also, a guess on the client's implicit experience. So our study had, not much to do with the Indian context or the training background, but to really identify what makes an empathic conjecture an empathic conjecture. What are the essential features, and then build a research-based definition out of it. And specifically for, in this context, I wanted to add the Indian background and focus on specifically a couple of things on what we found in the research. So, since we're talking about working with emotions, I think it's important to say that working with emotions actually requires us to use exploration responses so that we encourage self-agency and we encourage the client to explore their own experience while being empathically attuned. And these experiences communicate understanding, but also enhance the deepening process and helps clients move towards their emotions. And I guess we didn't get a chance to talk about that much about or I didn't put it here, but I mean there's so much to talk about what Shigeru presented in terms of how emotions are experienced and expressed even in the Indian context. So it's very helpful to have anything that helps clients move towards emotions. And if therapists have learned not to trust their own empathic resonance in their training, then I think it's very difficult to use more exploratory responses like empathic conjectures. So this is what we found, but for this presentation, just for time, I'm going to focus on the inclusion criteria. Let's see. So, and for a specific reason, just give me a moment. Yeah. So, we found two inclusion criteria. One was guessing, which we defined as sensing into the client's implicit experience and articulating something unsaid. And the second one was meaning match. And it was very interesting because the process of guessing was kind of conveyed with words like right, or it's like, or maybe, or I guess. stuff like that. But not all guesses were empathic conjectures. So we then tried to look at, what makes a guess an empathic conjecture, what is really important. And we found that the guesses that remain close to the client's immediate experience are what actually make it an empathic conjecture, which to us meant that as researchers, we can then identify elements in the client's previous expression that the therapist may have used to make a guess. And I think this is kind of really interesting for me because it articulates something that's that's unspoken or not talked about. We also created a degree of unspokenness in terms of a scale, starting with maybe no guessing in the therapist's response to it being immediately identifiable, to maybe not being identified at all and outside the client's frame of reference. And so that's what we excluded from empathic conjectures because it was outside the client's frame of reference. And why, or what is relevant here, I think, is that the inclusion criteria, especially meaning match, I think helps articulate the nuances of the therapist's experience in making an empathic conjecture. And so they're not mere guesses. They could come from the client's verbal, nonverbal expression or the therapist's own bodily resonance. And they're definitely not coming from the therapist's own frame of reference to give insight to the client in their own, into their own experience. So I think our findings make a case for the importance of deep empathic immersion to support emotional deepening work. And what I feel, more excited about, especially coming from the background that I described here, is that it helps us break down the process to some extent as an observer of what I think is, deep empathic immersion, really kind of going into the client's experience. Okay. I'm just going to check how much time I have before I move forward.
Yeah, you have a few minutes. That's fine.
Okay, great. So, with no specific relation to what I just spoke about, but I mean, of course, I guess there is some relationship because it's specifically related to the training background. I think for me, I had to really learn empathic attunement very deliberately, that it didn't come naturally to me, especially because I was trained in more directive approaches and I so much fell in love with emotion-focused therapy that when I started thinking more deeply about empathic attunement and therapist processes, and then got a chance to work on the previous project, I think I gravitated towards wanting to work on what about when the therapist's empathy gets blocked, when they're not able to empathize with a client, when it becomes challenging, that sort of a thing. And I used AI to generate an image of empathy blocks here for us. At the same time, I also want to say or kind of add that I think when we become fully present, maybe emotionally present, deeply immersed in sessions, in the client's experience, maybe bringing all of ourselves into that therapeutic encounter, I guess it makes sense for me to then, at least in my process, and also a little bit of what I've read, we also then end up bringing our own self into the therapy room. And we then bring in our own vulnerabilities, we bring in our own ways in which we approach emotion as therapists. our own relationship with emotions, our own ways of experiencing emotions also. So that's one of the one other reason that I found this topic quite interesting, and this is part of my PhD project. I'm very early into my PhD project. It's just been one year so far. So what I'm going to present is a little bit of just like a review of literature that I have done, and tell you a little bit of the study that I'm just starting out with. So currently I don't have any data to present on this, and it would be nice to have a discussion about it. So initially, I think I was able to articulate what I wanted to study because I read about Dolhanty and Steigler's presentation on therapist blogs, where they describe this as moments of when you know what to do but don't do it, highlighting that the therapist's empathy can get temporarily blocked even when they have the necessary skills and knowledge. We have a lot of research that supports the therapist's personal qualities, interpersonal skills are predictors of outcome. There's research talking about chronic disconnection strategies that can show up in the therapist process. So we all have, I guess, our own ways of disconnecting in the session, maybe to regulate ourselves. And that could involve rescuing or becoming passive or invisible. And in one of the studies, over 50% of therapists actually, reported that these disconnection strategies can leak into their therapy work. And I think it makes sense. So there's, some other work that has been done in related topics about this. So there's another study about momentary therapist disconnections. It could show up as emotion underregulation or internal preoccupation, which takes you away from the therapist process, from the therapy process in general. And this disconnection can even occur when the therapist intentionally try to cultivate presence, especially when their own unresolved feelings or fears are activated. There was another very interesting article recently on the self of therapist supervision task to work through intrusive therapist reactions. Where Barry actually presented like a theoretical sort of description of what the task could look like. And so I think there's a lot of indication that this is a common experience and it happens. And then there are ways, or maybe supervision is one way of working through this. The final research that I included in this was Shigeru, one of your recent papers on the Wounded Healer project, which I found quite interesting. So they explored the connection between therapists' adverse experiences and healing journeys and their ability to facilitate corrective emotional experiences. And if you would like to add something here, please go ahead. Or maybe after. So it would be really nice to hear about this. Yeah, but I can continue on talking about my first study in the PhD project, and then we can have a conversation about this. So building on all this research and my interest in therapist processes, I have decided to study empathy blocks in my PhD. And I think while previous studies have focused on specific types of therapist experiences, whether it's a negative reaction, whether it's resolving it in the supervision process, or whether it's about its relationship, with other things. I wanted to first start off with defining these events and then looking at how they emerge in the therapy process and how they're experienced. So my first study is about exploring therapists' experiences of empathy blocks, and it's a discovery-oriented, qualitative approach influenced by empirical phenomenology. And my main question is to look at how therapists experience an empathy block. I'm also doing it in two phases. So the first phase is going to have a Qualtrics form where you just give an account of a description of when you experienced an empathy block. And the second phase is going to be with fewer people. And it's going to have basically interviews with therapists on their experience of these blocks. And for this, I can say that my PhD will have this space to also collect data from India and other Asian countries. So eventually, when I do have the findings, that I would be able to maybe speak a little bit more about, also maybe about how specifically empathy blocks show up maybe in the Asian context as well. Okay, so with that, I think I am done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simran. Very interesting study on empathy conjectures and blocks. Let's open the floor to the audience for questions. So we are talking about therapist processes in relation to an emotional related topic, right? Mhm.
And I'd be very interested to hear from Shigeru about the Wounded Healer project.
Mhm. So one question I have while we're waiting for people to type and ask their questions. So conjectures, can it be like how do we know it is therapist empathy versus their own projections or assumptions about the client?
Yeah, I think so. Most often, I mean, what we found in this study is that um, the meaning match is that when you go back into the client's response, you could see something in the verbal or non-verbal expression, maybe find some elements that the therapist has sort of taken in to make a tentative guess when they do an empathic conjecture, or it could come from their own bodily resonance, which is when they probably specify that, as you say this, that I feel somewhat heavy inside myself, for instance, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's very clearly kind of using their own bodily resonance. Otherwise, most often we found that empathic conjectures have either elements of the client's verbal or non-verbal expression in the previous response um, that help help the therapist make the guess.
So in a way, we must look at the client's content in order to judge whether the therapist is making, having a shared frame of reference. Right.
Right. It could be the content, it could be the process, it could be the quality, it could be the nonverbal expression.
Mm-hmm.
So it could
Okay.
be, yeah, all those things.
Thank you. So we have a hand up, YMN.
Yes, I am Yamini. I work at Namhans, a clinical psychologist by profession. I do have a question to both the presenters, in fact, and it's something that I'm going to tie it up together, and it would really be helpful. So, my concern is with regards to what, like the empathy conjectures, right? And also the cultural aspects in which we function, especially in India. So, considering, okay, so when we work with people, there's also a hierarchy that sort of enters in, which I think Simran also tried to elicit by using the whole framework itself, and also very much like Guru Chela paradigm, where we want the power to be in front of us, but also we see a shift in this form of power balance where we're now seeing more collaboration being expected as the class movements are increasing, whatever. But my concern is with regards to working with some factors in the room. For example, if we have caregivers, if we have, certain cultural expectations that are already sitting in the room, and you need to take care of somebody who is extremely ill and you have to put up with it. So it becomes very difficult to sort of then define their meaning of stress, define their meanings or their emotions even to enter the room, because there's so much of like expectations that they need to fulfill versus they are not directly the client as much as the client who enters the room because somebody else is the client and they're sort of rooted around that process. So what I'm also trying to get at is I'm not very clear with the way that I frame questions, but what I'm trying to really get at is with regards to how do we pick on these cultural factors that may enter the room that may also sometimes like upset the therapist and letting work move forward, or also the fact that sometimes individuating certain expectations, certain collectivistic values that are deeply seated, to then refining the emotional process such that we can also have their emotions enter the room. Like there's a lot of blurring over there because what gets translated versus what is not getting translated, and there's also a lot of barriers that are systemic with regards to the number of people coming in, the number of language variations that we have, the way that they're talking. Then even if you are sort of trained in directive and non-directive approaches, sometimes having lack of language barrier, like not knowing that language, makes you more directive as opposed to non-directive while practicing. So I don't know, I would like any opinion on this.
Okay. Um, so I mean, I'm aware of the context at NIMHANS because I got to briefly work there for a couple of years. And I don't know if the questions around how do we navigate the process with the caregivers and kind of keeping the collectivistic culture in mind without offending the person, but also not getting frustrated as a therapist. Uh,
Yeah.
something of, yeah,
Yes.
okay. Okay, I guess, and the second one was about language. I think language is definitely quite a difficulty, especially because the number of languages that we have, and that if we can't be very fluent in a specific language, then I do see that as definitely a barrier in doing the work. That it from an EFT's lens, especially when I started learning EFT, I stuck to English for some time before I could work in Hindi, which is a language that I'm fluent in. Um, Coming back to the question of working with caregivers, I guess it depends on what is the expectation out of you, and doing it collaboratively and talking about it. Um, Talking about what the therapy process might entail, whether this is kind of coming in as something that you didn't expect or didn't, um, you, you weren't looking to do it all, versus whether you've kind of decided to work with the family. I know in Enhance you do both. And then how much of the control, I suppose, I mean, I guess that's one of the, how much of the control of what happens in the room. I mean, that you have to kind of very clearly describe the boundaries associated with it. But I don't know, Shigeru, you want to talk about it from a Japanese uh, context as well. I don't work with families. Yeah.
I couldn't catch everything, the question, but
Yeah.
I think that I mean, there's a lot of things, that was said. I think that I mean, first of all, I mean, we talked about the regional differences, but I think even within a family, with the regional, generational differences, the language of emotion and also emotional experiences are quite varied. And I think the reason, probably the reason, Simran, that you're focusing on empathy is a way of us getting to that sort of individual way of experiencing emotions, and the way that person feels and experience it, not just the word of language and the speech, but sort of the getting to the sort of something between the language and the body, and the whole experience of it. So sometimes we are very concerned about the language and something concrete, but I think working with emotions often involve that sort of experiential, here and now, very unique to each person, and in the moment, that moment to moment process rather than conceptualization of emotions. I'm not sure if I answered it correct, in a understandable way.
Yeah, I can add to that actually because when I was in training, I was training in a different state that I didn't belong to. So I didn't know the language for a long time, and I learned the language as part of being in the program. And so a lot of what I relied on was nonverbal um, cues that I got. And of course, I didn't start off doing therapy, it was more just interviewing. Um, but I think what you're talking about is quite important, and it definitely speaks to my experience as well, that sometimes emotions can kind of go beyond language. And of course, there are times when you can also reflect on how nuanced language can be and how sometimes it's important to be able to understand and use. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is there's so much emphasis on speaking in first person to evoke emotional experience. And um, in India also, and I might be deviating from the question here, but um, a lot of clients don't speak in first person, or that doesn't come naturally. So, yeah, and in some languages, I don't think it's right to speak in first person grammatically as well. So then, um, yeah, so there are differences. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if we answered your question.
Yes, I'm taking in a lot from everything that's been answered. Although, I think I did not frame the question correctly, though. Like the second part is answered. The first part was more about what are some of these collectivistic values that sit inside the therapy room with us when we're doing our work. And
Mm.
like, then how do we define power? Then also with regards to what are the empathetic roadblocks that we might have, because sometimes we're also working around some authority in the room, and also with certain genders versus being non-genders, and also as a queer practitioner, when you are a certain way, then what is it that you're going to be receiving from the clients in front of you, considering that's not in your control. So I'm also wondering about these cultural factors that sort of enter in when we're talking about empathetic blocks. Yeah.
Mhm. I mean, these are really important questions, I think, to ask yourself on a day-to-day basis. Um, I guess, I mean, it's not unnatural for us to, or I mean, it's probably very normal for us to experience um, something like interference from, or what might feel like an interference from a caregiver, or trying to kind of ask you about what's happening in therapy for the client, or trying to cross boundaries. And maybe it's very specific to each of us in terms of our own histories, even as therapists, to sit with what are these collectivistic values that we um, take in, and how that impacts our empathy. Um, That's what I would say. I think it's probably quite individual to each of us.
Sorry for my computer problem. I had to fix something. So maybe we can switch gears a little bit about training. I see a couple of questions about training. How, what we can do to enhance process training for early career therapists, especially in some contexts where we are so used to learning more of the direct approach or using more directive approach with our clients. So maybe we can speak a little bit on that. Yeah, Simran. Yeah, do you
Yeah,
want to talk first? Yeah.
I have lots of ideas about this, but I know that when it actually comes to execution, it might be very difficult and there might be a lot of pushback, at least in our our context. I think starting with just making it a practice in training programs to start recording therapy sessions, which currently doesn't exist in most of the Indian programs. So we can't look at the therapy process if it's not there, right? And if we're just talking about what happened in the session, we probably lose out on a lot of details, very important aspects of the process that could be spoken about. And since we don't have that practice, we don't have I mean, some training programs now look at video demonstrations to teach, but that's also very less, and that also runs into, I guess, the same problem of culture. It might be very different or very removed from what happens in India, so it's not very relevant sometimes. Um, so I see that as a way in to more teaching and training about the therapy process can come from first recording sessions. And then talking about and looking at common therapeutic processes, looking at client processes, developing our perceptual skills. And there's probably more I can talk about that. Shigeru, maybe you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that the recording of sessions are very important, but I find that in Asian context, in many countries, it is the most difficult thing to implement, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that's a question like how to change that environment. I don't know, how is it in Hong Kong, Harold?
I don't think it's easy to change the environment because it's almost like a cultural script in a way that, we can't really change the fact that people are adhering to, more hierarchical relationships, more direction from the therapist. But
Mm,
perhaps in terms of training, I'm just thinking about, how we can have both in our minds that we learn, to be more collaborative as therapists, but at the same time, understanding that clients may not have that, relationship structure in their mind that is, they need a bit more introduction as well.
mm,
So at the beginning of the therapy, maybe, people may still, I mean, clients may still expect the therapist to give a bit more directions and answers. And then, and, we teach our translate, they can, as the relationship deepens, they can do more of the collaboration. Yeah.
mhm. Right, right. I
Yeah.
mean,
So we have
I don't,
another hand up.
yeah.
So it's like I'm asking the question and answering it too. No, I think Simran and I have talked about it before too. I teach in a, university of counseling psychology. So one of the things that we ended up doing over the last 2-3 years vis-a-vis recording sessions is we started from semester 1, where they're learning skills, training among their own peers. So just encouraging them to record the sessions and to see the benefit of it for their own learning process. And then when they were in the second year, when they had to see clients, there was resistance in terms of like, oh, clients might not be comfortable and such. But because they'd seen the benefit of it, they were able to communicate, taking consent even from the clients a lot more openly. So when we realized, pushing them into the second year, asking for recording consent was difficult. And then when we demonstrated the usefulness of it for their own training, it's almost like, so as of now, the students are able to get session recordings at least with one client per semester. So this is one thing we did. But I think, a lot more, I would like a lot more kind of a training for myself, perhaps, on how to use videos for further learning or teaching processes, process awareness to the students and for myself too. Yeah, I'm slowly learning, but just thought I'd put it.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's also that us trainers need to find ways to effectively integrate the videos in our teaching too.
I think it feels like once the students and us are used to the video, and it becomes a lot in the background. But starting it is really important. How to frame it, how to explain it. Maybe trainers' self-disclosure a little bit about how it was like at the beginning for us can help.
Definitely. I think, Bhuvana is one of the minorities in India, right? I mean, in terms of being able to accomplish this in a university setup. I think mostly what happens is the permissions don't come on an institute level. So, I mean, it's a bigger problem. There are a lot of, yeah, I mean, a lot of things associated with that we can talk about, but I think that's true that if you introduce it early, then it becomes a part of your practice and you get used to it. The problem with this also, on the other hand, is when you're not used to it and you've had years and years of training, and then you want to switch to something more process experiential, it becomes more difficult. There's more shame attached to just recording and watching yourself, and you're just not used to it. So I feel like that's actually one of the most important problems for us to solve as a country at the moment, to just be able to implement this early on.
Thank you. So, any other questions or comments from the audience?
I'd like to add something here.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Supriya, and sorry I'm not able to keep my video on. In terms of the recording bit, right, I find that it gets easier when there is already a rapport built with the client and clearly explain what is the recording for, who would see it, and when it would be deleted. Because I think as a collectivist culture, I also experienced this with my friends and family members, where the fact that even coming into therapy feels like a brave step because you're supposed to take care of all your emotions and, not talk to strangers about it. And now from there, the idea that somebody might be listening to it again brings back to that theme of shame, which I think is very, very strong in collectivist cultures about being found out that you're going for hell. So, I found that when I was asking for recordings, it generally came from clients who were comfortable in their own skin and were reassured that it was going to be used for a limited time by limited people for the sake of training and then deleted. And then I would inform them once it's deleted. So I think that helped a lot for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it certainly is, having a rationale and explain it and answering questions can really, start the collaborative process. So we can use that as a content or starting point. That, if clients have questions, we invite them. So sometimes, in a hierarchical structure where there's a lot of hierarchy in relationships, then the therapist need to be the one initiating this conversation. And, subsequently client can really open up a little more. So thank you so much. So I just want to share a screen and promote a little bit. I think Shigeru was starting with that. We have an event coming up next year, and maybe Shigeru can talk a little bit about this since you are the local host for this event.
Thanks. Thanks for the time. We are going to have an SPR international meeting next year in June at my university in Osaka. The theme is reimagining psychotherapy, a dialogue on innovations across approaches and culture. And I hope that there will be a lot of people coming from Asian countries and join in person. I think it would be a special meeting. My university is located between Osaka downtown and the Kyoto, 20 minutes from Kyoto as well. So even though it's going to be humid, I think that the many people here from Asian countries are used to humid weather. But I hear the Japanese summer is very special in its humidity. But I hope you can join. And if you have any questions, please write me a message.
Yeah, so if you are interested in presenting, the abstract portal is actually open right now. So if you can see the screen here, right here, submission portal. If you want to present something related to research or thoughts about practicing in a different culture, feel free to submit your work. The deadline is December 14th, so about 1 month, exactly 1 month from now. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's that. And also, let me share the screen. Any final comments from the presenters?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question. I think we both were looking at emotional focused therapy, but I think it would be great to look at emotional processes beyond emotional focused therapy in different type of therapy.
Right. Especially since, even if you are in CBT or humanistic or other therapies, emotions is still a big part of therapy. So yeah. Okay, so if there's no further comments, I would like to share a screen another time, and this is a final screen for today. It is what we call the, let me try to open it up. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we are doing a post-webinar survey. If you have any feedback for SPR Asia or the speaker, feel free to type it there. And if you are interested in joining SPR Asia, feel free to also click there and register. And we will, keep you updated on any new events and any newsletters that we create from time to time. You will receive them. And yeah, thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the next SPR Asia event, the SPR in Osaka. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll leave the screen on for a little bit so that people can click. Thank you. Bye-bye.